Good day, everyone. First of all, we want to say that this is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines, to use this as an educational material. We, the Group 1, would like to share the introduction to the study of globalization by Manfred Steger. First, I would like to introduce to you my co-members, the presenter, I, Engine Cadet Las Marias, and my partner, Engine Cadet Tano. This would share the Manfred's ideology of globalization. Next is Engine Cadet Sumalinog and Isgana would like to share the Michael Frieden's sentiment. And Engine Cadet Aliguay and Tumada would like to share the five scapes of globalization. And Engine Cadet Estrelianes and Idon would like to share the Alger. Yes. So first, the Manfred ideology of globalization. Here are their objectives: to differentiate the three main types of globalism, to discuss the ideology point view of globalization, to identify the basic qualities of globalization. At the end, the student must learn the major elements. At the end of the video discussion, reporters are able to explain Frieden's sentiments, to be able to know on how the culture shared in global to local, to be able to discuss the fundamentals of the five scapes of globalization, to provide clear information and clarify all sorts of questions regarding the five scapes of globalization. So, globalization. The process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. A process of a worldwide expansion. What is being expanded? Social relations and consciousness. Then, the three basic qualities of globalization. First, connectivity. What is connectivity? Connectivity, understood as the forging of worldwide linkages and ties. Think of internet as an example of connectivity. Next, mobility. Mobility understood as the acceleration of flows of movement of networks. Again, wonderful example of mobility would be the movement of business travelers or the movement of refugees across political borders. Imagination. Imagination understood as people's expanding consciousness of the world as a single place. The idea of global citizenship, cosmopolitanism, knowing that you're part of the global human community, that more and more is sinking in as globalization proceeds. There are clearly four formations of globalization. The major elements of globalization: formation of people, formation of ideas, formation of things, formation of organization. In larger numbers and faster than ever. Second element, disembodied formation of globalization, ideas, information, data. Think of the difficult medias in social medias as a wonderful examples of disembodied globalization. Third, objectify globalization. The quality of things that are moving, that are expanding, interconnecting small things like viruses, COVID-19, to very large, trailable commodities in ships and large containers. And the fourth elements of globalization is the institutional. These organizations like transnational corporation, Exxon. Next reporter would be Engine Cadet Tano.
So, so I am in. So I am Engine Cadet Tano. So globalization refers to expansion and intensification of social relations and consciousness across world time and world space. It is multi-dimensional phenomenon involving economics, politics, culture, ideology, environment, and technology. Next play. Timo, boy. Ano ba? There are three main types of globalism or ideologies that endow the concept of globalization with particular values and meaning. First, market globalism. Second, justice globalism and religious globalism. So, market globalism advocates promise a consumerist neoliberal free market world. This ideology is held by many powerful individuals who claim it transmits democracy and benefits everyone. However, it is also reinforced inequality and can be politically motivated. Second is religious globalisms are always are ways of understanding the global environment as expressed through specific religious worldviews. The literature tends to see a dichotomous relationship between religious and secular globalism, with the former in opposition to the latter. And lastly is the justice globalism, envisages a global civil society with fairer relationship and environmental safeguards. They disagree with market globalists who view neoliberalism as the only way. Religious globalism strives for a global religious community with superiority over secular structures, and also defines globalism as the process that multiplies activities, connections, and networks that increasingly overcome traditional political, economic, cultural, and geographical boundaries. Okay.
So I will be the next reporter. Thank you, Engine Cadet Cano. So, to continue, I am Engine Cadet Gibson Sumalino. Together with Engine Cadet Isgana, we'll be discussing Michael Frieden's sentiments. So, the idea of ideology has been discussed earlier by the previous reporter, but let us go deeper by answering this question. Why is the study of ideology so important for understanding and navigating through the social world of which we are a part? And why do we have to cast aside all approaches that regard ideologies as abstract, superimposed by manipulative and power-thirsty individual and groups, and opposed to pragmatism of political life? The simple answer is that we always live in a world of ideologies, and every one of us has one, whether we are aware of it or not, and whether it is clearly expressed or just a bigger set of beliefs perception. Let's proceed. The main section of this article relies on three criteria suggested by Frieden. To assess this ideological maturity of globalism, and this criteria will be further discussed later. First, let us talk about the ideologies of globalization. So, Michael Frieden skeptical assessment states that it is far too early to pronounce on globalism status as an ideology. So, in his part, it is seeks to establish the globalism not only represent a set of political ideas and beliefs coherent enough to warrant the status of new ideology, but also constitute the dominant ideology of our times against which all its challengers must define themselves. Then he proposes two fertile lines of inquiry. So first, to question the implicit holism in the notion of ideological family. So this one, it means that Frieden briefly considered globalism as a possible holistic competitor, but immediately returned to his skeptical view that it is far too early to pronounce on globalism status as an ideology. The second one is to query the dominant conventions of classifying and categorizing ideologies with a view to establishing the degree to which they constitute useful cluster. So it means that he suggests creative thought exercise with the goal of gaining understanding into some organizational element according to which ideologies can be categorized. Next slide, please. So Frieden Michael argues convincingly that the current fragmentation of established ideologies and the revived uncertainty concerning whether ideology still exists have highlighted the difficulty of capturing the changing morphologies of political belief system. Frieden reclassified design based on select features of human behavior, such as pride, fear, gregariousness, complacency, vulnerability, insubordination, and self-depreciation. So the next reporter will be Injen Kadit Iskana.
So to continue, let me introduce again myself. I am Engine Cadet Gana and Freedom's virtue. It wisely reminds students of ideology that political belief systems are ephemeral, constellation whose shifting morphologies demand periodic scholarly reassessment. People or students can have the idea of the political beliefs that are lasting for a very short time, which they can shift to other morphemes of periodic time. Second virtues, it challenges 21st century's analysis of ideology to replace antiquated, popular, and conventional classification systems that might obscure more than they illuminate. It means that the scholars must be willing to entertain the possibility of wholesale ideological transformation and thus be prepared to rethink. revise, and perhaps replace outdated conceptual morphologies that no longer capture the dynamics of actual existing political belief system. Third, virtues. It displays considerable intellectually imagination by calling for experimental thought exercises designed to redraw old ideological boundaries and reclassify ideological systems. So Steger resists Frieden's brief assessment of globalism. Steger article maintains that it is not too early to pronounce on globalism status as an ideological. He said that the article will seek to the establish all political ideas and beliefs coherent enough to warrant the status of a new ideology, but also constitute the dominant political belief system of our time against which all of its challengers must define themselves. Globalization. So what is globalization? Process, condition, or ideology? So Michael Frieden point out that the term globalization is that as an ideology but a range of processes nesting under one rather and widely effective. Freeland states that he uses the term globality to signify future social conditions that portray the interconnection of economic, political, and cultural flow that make existing political borders and economic barriers irrelevant. So for the next presenter, I would like to call Idon and Estrelianes.
So, for the continuation, I am Engine Cadet Idon, and for the Alger Aparodai contribution, there are five dimensions of global cultural flows, and the topic, the scape of globalization, only will can explain that one. And relationship between the five cultural flows is Ethnoscapes, Mediascapes, Technoscapes, Financescapes, Ideoscapes, and the relationship between these scapes is deeply disjunctive and profoundly unpredictable. Scapes are intrinsically fluid. This marks a departure, for example, from more traditional Martian analysis of culture that might privilege the Financescape as the most powerful locus demanding the orbit of other dimension. So, according to Arjun Paruday, these scapes affected by the context in which they appear and the different actors that are involved is nation states, multinationals, and diasporic communities, among others. And he discussed how the five essential contract overthrew the previous nation of separate economies and pure capitalism. Essentially, this five dimension of global cultural flow cause a disorganized capitalism which involved the separate disjointed operation of the economy, culture, and politics. And Aparodai states that in order to understand how to conduct the most successful global economy, the understanding of these diasporas and movements of cultural product needs to be achieved. And next is
Uh, I'm Engine Cadet Jerome Estrelianis. So I'm going to discuss the cultural homogenizations. So it is the aspect of cultural globalizations referring to the reductions in cultural diversity through the populations and diffusions of the wide array of cultural symbols, not only the physical object, but custom, ideas, and values. And the process which by local cultures are transformed or absorbed by the dominance outside cultures. Cultural homogenizations in theory could be lead to the development of a single global cultures and eliminations of all other and local cultures. So ang kining cultural homogenizations kay kuan ni siya kanang silbi culture siya na kanang bragi sagol ba. So ang kana once ang kanang product na maadto na sa laing lugar, so ang kana na product kay musikat. So katong mga daan na cultural na products, so ma-eliminate to sila kay na may mas nindot na product na takuan. So next is cultural heterogenizations. It is a process of adaptations of elements of global culture to local culture. It also termed as globalizations, which means a case in which a global product is transformed into another shape in order to meet the needs of local customers. This is a phenomenon which is the alternative to Americanizations. In other words, the terms of refers to adoptions of a product or service specific, specifically to each locality or cultures in which it is sold. So ang pasabot aning kuan cultural heterogenization kay kining ang culture ay kanang product diri sa global product once maadto na siya sa local ilisan do siya kuan kanang cultural name or cultural products para ang katong culture dito sa lugar is ganahan sa sila mo palit ana na product kay tungod pananglitan sa foods. So ang foods diri sa USA nilang sardinas dito kay laig lasa. So ikaabot diri sa Pilipinas ang katong kwan kanang lasa sa sardinas pang Pinoy na sad. So mao ni ang pasabot sa kining cultural heterogenization. So next slide. So Arjun argued that central problem of today global interactions is the tensions between cultural and homogenizations and cultural heterogenizations. One man imagined community is another man of political persons. He say, and he further explains on how the commons models of understanding of the global economy does not fit with the ever-expanding and changing the culture, mixing in this current era. The previous thoughts of separates the century-periphery models and push and pull in terms of migration theory, so do not correspond to the movements, as she calls them, of cultural expressions. Next. So according to Padurai, the new global culture economy is complex, disjunctive and overlapping global flows, and not autonomous nations can characterize the cultures and their interrelationship. So the next present thing is Cadet Tomada and Alibod.
Hi everyone. My name is Engine Cadet Aligwe General, and together with Engine Cadet Renhold Tomada, we are going to discuss the 5 scapes of globalization. So next. So global cultural flow. Apadorai Scapes theory starts with the idea of global cultural flow. Apadorai argues that we used to always see the world in a binary: globe north versus global south, east versus west, first world versus third world, and etc. According to Apadurai, that is too simplistic. We're not two separate worlds separated by the rich and poor. Especially not now. We're in the age of globalization. Instead, Apadurai argues we all influence each other. Our cultures intersect and overlap all the time. Next. So, how the cultures around the world influence each other? So, through these five different dimensions of cultural flow, you might recognize them. Scapes, Ethnoscapes. Ethnoscapes represents the movement of people around the world. Next is the Technoscapes. Technoscapes refers to the ways technologies help speed up cross-border movements. And Financescape refers to the rapid movement of money across borders. And Mediascapes, Apadure wrote of the power of international media to send news information across the globe and rapid rate. And Ideoscapes refers to the ideas, symbols, and narrative that have spread around the globe. For example, the rapid spread of democracy in the 18th and 19th centuries. So next, Ethnoscapes. Ethnoscapes represents the movement of people around the world as Apadurai says, tourists, immigrants, refugees, exiles, guest workers, and other moving groups and persons appear to affect the politics and of and between nations to a hit, hitherto unprecedented degree. So Apadare notes that there do still appear to be very stable communities that stay in one place for generations and who will stay there for generations to come. But nonetheless, there are more people than ever moving around the world for work, leisure, family, and due to the displacement from their homelands. So this is in part due to the increasing speed and decreasing cost of travel around the globe. So examples of this is the refugees, economic migrants, and tourists. So refugees, people who have moved to seek asylum from danger in their homelands. And the example of this is like what is happening today, like in the Ukraine and Ukrainians they're that Ukrainians are living in their country to live and save themselves from the war between the Ukraine and the Russia. Oh, yun na. Then the next is economic migrants like the OFWs. Oh, an example is like the OFWs who venture abroad for the sake of their families. And next is the tourist. It is about people traveling to share and experience different cultures. We've seen this on social media that bloggers travels to other country just to know and experience about others' culture, like how they live and um, what are their beliefs and practices. Next. So next is Technoscapes. So Technoscapes refers to the ways technologies help speed up cross-border movements, and sometimes this is also referred to as technological globalizations. So technologies themselves are visible all over the world now. Even desperate asylum seekers crossing from the Libya to Italy are seen with mobile phones, and sometimes their only worldly possessions. On much a larger scale, we see the movement of Japanese and Chinese technologies all over the globe. And of course, communication technologies like the internet are helping facilitate the rapid movement of money, people, and goods across borders and at faster and faster rates. Example is handheld devices. The global movement of smartphones, cameras, and personal computing devices. Examples are um, the social media that we took pictures and video and we upload it to different kind of or form of social medias to share our culture, and also we are able to know about the culture from the other places. And next is the internet technology has helped us to connect across the globe at an, an unprecedented rate. So if we want to know about the culture of the other countries, we can just use internet. So next is to be discussed with Abaikan, Baranhog Tamada.
Thank you. So to continue the discussion, allow me to introduce myself. I am Cadet Renhol J. Tomada, and I am going to discuss about the third scape of globalization, Financescape. So Financescapes represent the rapid movement of money across borders. Visa and MasterCards are almost everywhere these days, enabling us to use our money globally. So examples of Financescapes is first, um, stock exchanges. So through stock exchanges, trades of capital occur in seconds, all hours of the day across the global stock exchanges. So unlike the past methods of exchanging, we no longer have to be there physically to do stock exchange. Now we can just do our trades by a single click, and then done. A trade has been done, and that is why it's one of the examples of Financescapes. So second, credit cards. So credit cards allows the transfer of money almost 100% easier compared to the traditional ways of manually handing money over to your buyer and seller. And the third example of Financescapes is the new transfer technologies. So in our in our current timeline, we are currently in the level of technology wherein we are able to transfer money online. Examples of this are TransferWise and Monzo, which are revolutionizing the method of transfer around the globe by creating new and cheaper money transfer business models. So again, there are a lot of companies that are trying to revolutionize the transfer technologies. So next, so next is Mediascape. Mediascapes has an increasingly global reach. Appa Durai wrote that the power of the international media to send news information across the globe at a rapid rate. So this means that media is a very influential factor in the in the scapes of globalization. So examples of these major medias, examples of the medias is blogging. So through blogging, people are able to relay and show some of their daily lives or the things that they want others to see without being directly connected to large companies such as example BBC, Al Jazeera, and all the sorts. That is why blogging comes first in the example, because blogging is can be done by almost all of the people around the world without any sort of charges, as long as you do not cross any sort of rule. Next is BBC. BBC is a famous company of journalists and global news outlets. So people around the world rely on this on global news outlet like this one to get information. That is because this this certain this certain news outlet has been able to successfully establish itself as a source of legit and genuine information. That is why it comes second. Next, 24 hours news. So people are consuming media instantaneously using Twitter and smartphones. This has changed news cycles and fed a global hunger for more and more news instantly. So nowadays we do not just get news from the news outlets like BBC, Al Jazeera and the sorts. We can now easily access new news and updates through social medias. Example in TikTok, in Facebook, Twitter, or all sorts of medias, we can easily see a lot of mediums that are being represented to us by the people, by our fellow netizens. But a friendly reminder that not all news found in social medias are reliable. So next, so Ideoscapes. Ideoscapes refers to the ideas, symbols, and narratives that have spread around the globe. Examples of this includes the Ideascapes includes the notion of democracy, human rights, welfare, and so on. Ideascapes are heavily influenced by local culture, semantics, and historical events and political context. So, example of this are capitalism and socialism. Much of the second half of the 20th century was consumed by competing ideas of capitalism and socialism, which spread through their spheres of influence. This means that majority in the 20th century, we have gone through the ideas of capitalism. But however, as it remains true that democracy still is the most prioritized method in terms of influence in a country. So next example is a musical style. Musical style means that in a certain country, we all have our own special genre, or not just that, in a certain timeline like in the 1980s, 1970s, 2000s, different kinds of genres have been known to rise up to fame, like pop, jazz, hip hop, rap, and all sorts. So an example of this is during the 1960s, the British invasion bands like The Who and the Beatles were able to successfully spread their style of music in the United States, which influenced subsequent musical styles for generation up until now. The Beatles and all sorts of bands like Scorpion, Air Supply, they still influence the styles of the music in our current generation. And next, so that is all for the five five scapes of globalization.
So that's all for today's discussion. Thank you, everyone, and especially to you, sir. Thank you, and God bless.